I had a whole other video planned for today, but I'm shooting this the day that it's coming out because this is too good. Hey folks, so we're going to talk about Jonathan Majors, The Daily Wire, and an absolute garbage fire of a film production. Now, at the time that I am talking, the news on this broke in the last couple of days, and I am getting on it pretty quickly, partially, honestly, just because I want something fun. Do I have like a ton of insight to add beyond what's out there and known? I mean, I like to think a little, not as much as I might normally try and bring to this conversation, but just let me have this. Let me have this for fun, please. So, Jonathan Majors, former rising star, former Kang in the MCU, star of Lovecraft Country and The Harder They Fall. His career has been on the skids following his 2023 conviction on assault and harassment charges against his former girlfriend. And it got announced earlier this year that he was going to make his big comeback in a film being made by The Daily Wire. Now, there's a lot of context and a lot of history for all the players involved in this. If you want something a lot more thorough, particularly on the end of The Daily Wire and the people who they work with to produce films, I would recommend videos made by Jose. It's a good channel, and he's done some really thorough work on this. But to boil it down to basic bullet points, just so you're up to speed. The Daily Wire is a right-wing media outlet that was founded by Ben Shapiro and Jeremy Boring. It grew in prominence through a combination of tightly edited right-wing talking points and gaming Facebook's algorithm and breaking their terms of service to artificially boost themselves. The Daily Wire has a collection of conservative pundits of varying degrees of grossness. This has included Matt Walsh, Candace Owens, Brett Cooper, although the latter two are no longer at the company as it's been bleeding both money and talent lately. Again, Jose goes over this more thoroughly. But one of the key factors of the very founding of the Daily Wire is despite being built largely on political and cultural commentary, it was ultimately founded by people who wanted to be in Hollywood and couldn't cut it. And they came to the decision that Hollywood pushed them out because of their conservative views, as opposed to any other possible reason, such as they weren't talented or skilled enough, or maybe they were just assholes. It's not like there's any successful conservative people still in Hollywood being worked with. That certainly doesn't exist. I mean, it's not like Clint Eastwood or Kelsey Grammer or Sylvester Stallone or Tim Allen or Tom Selleck or Adam Sandler are all continuing to work in Hollywood. No, it must be because Ben Shapiro and Jeremy Boring are conservative. That's the only reason. It couldn't possibly have anything to do with the fact that Ben Shapiro was writing about how Hollywood was turning women into whores in the early 2000s. I'm sure doing that has nothing to do with it. Look, Ben, I'm just going to say this once. It's not about your political views. It's about you being an absolute asshole when expressing them. That's why nobody wanted to work with you. Also, your writing sucks. That's the other one. But in the last 5 years, the folks at the Daily Wire have been trying their best to build the entertainment that they were barred from making in Hollywood. And that all started with the release of Run, Hide, Fight, a movie they did not produce, however, they were involved in the distribution of. Run, Hide, Fight from writer-director Kyle Rankin had done the circuit on festivals but hadn't been picked up. It basically boils down to Die Hard at a school shooting, and while it had a little bit of buzz, largely from how controversial the subject matter was, nobody really seemed that interested in picking it up. Though that might only partly have to do with the subject matter and the quality of the film, that probably also had a fair bit to do with Dallas Sonnier, who was the producer on it. There's a lot to go over with Sonnier, but again, boiling it down as simple as I can. Sonnier had actually been carving out a pretty successful little niche for himself by producing low-budget films, mostly horror-tinged, in Texas. This started with Bone Tomahawk and would go to include films like Brawl in Cell Block 99, Dragged Across Concrete, and VFW. None of which were box office successes, strictly speaking, but they were all successful enough to get noticed enough to probably have made a tidy little profit through streaming rights and other distribution after a small theatrical run. Sonnier had been doing pretty well for himself under his company Cinescape, and they were the original producers on Run, Hide, Fight. However, that changed when Sonnier completely shut down Cinescape and relaunched with a completely new company called Bonfire Legend, which is what he now works under. Why did that happen? Well, a producer that he worked with, one Adam Donaghy, who had worked on the previous 4 films that had been released by Sonnier's company, he was arrested for sexually assaulting a 15-year-old, and pretty swiftly after that, the Daily Beast did an expose about toxic environments on films that he'd worked on, all of which had been made by Cinescape. All of this had led to Sonnier closing Cinescape, opening Bonfire Legend, and desperately needing new partners because he was now basically starting from scratch. In swoops the Daily Wire. Now, since the Daily Wire released Run, Hide, Fight, they claimed to some degree of success. That's incredibly unclear. It never had a theatrical run, and we don't know what Daily Wire Plus's streaming numbers are, and they can certainly claim that they had an uptick in subscribers based on the movie, but we'll never see the data on that, so who knows. But since then, Sonnier has been tied pretty much directly with the Daily Wire and their entertainment productions. He has worked on some other stuff beside that, but he is there for pretty much all the Daily Wire's stuff at this point. Now, it's debatable whether or not Sonnier actually would have wanted to work with the Daily Wire prior to everything going down. He certainly indicates that he always had some conservative leanings and notions to how he thought the industry as a whole, or, generally speaking, politics should go, but how much of that is honest and how much of that is cope is unclear. I think what I can safely say is, regardless of whether or not he shares political alignment with the folks at the Daily Wire, if he had not had to completely close his original company and restart from scratch, there is no way in hell he would have partnered with them. He was doing too well. He didn't need them. Not before Adam Donaghy got arrested and charged. I don't know if he ever actually went to trial and or got convicted. I couldn't find that, but he was definitely charged by a grand jury. So the impression I get is that upon Cinescape collapsing, Sonnier grabbed the first life raft he could, which was the Daily Wire. Thing about the Daily Wire, though, its reputation is such that once you work with it, it's gonna be hard to do anything else. And as I said, Sonnier has done a little bit of other work, nothing of note, and nothing that feels like it's ever going to rebuild what he had started to make with his original company. Now, I put as much emphasis on Sonnier as I did because there's going to be some quotes from him later that are just so choice, and I want you to have context for who he is. But Jonathan Majors, let's get back to him. Majors was charged with multiple assault counts and ultimately only convicted on 2 misdemeanor accounts. He was sentenced to no jail time, but instead to 52 weeks of a domestic violence program. And he hasn't really had much of a career since then. I think if we're being completely honest, the fact that he was dropped by pretty much everybody, Disney and Marvel being the big ones, as soon as the verdict came down, that was so swift. I can't help but feel that them wanting to distance themselves from a man freshly convicted of assault is only part of it, and part of it was Disney and Marvel probably wanted an excuse to just shut down the entire Kang storyline because it wasn't working and audiences didn't like it, and it was probably going to be easier just to drop it than try and retool the thing. But that's a whole other can of worms, and I kind of talked about it last time I talked about Majors, so we'll move on from that. The one other person I'm going to mention by name is Kyle Rankin, who is the writer-director of, yes, Run, Hide, Fight, but also of this new film, which we don't have a ton of details on, though there's some rumors. I'll get to those as well. I don't know how to feel about him in particular. And looking at his filmography and seeing that the movie that he made between Run, Hide, Fight and this new one he's working on was done completely separate from the Daily Wire, I don't know, it kind of makes me wonder if he's in a little bit of a similar situation to Sonnier, which is that he feels his current career is probably going to be better buoyed by them than by trying to avoid them. So let's talk about Majors working with the Daily Wire. This obviously kind of fits a pattern for them because the Daily Wire had previously scooped up Gina Carano. Now, it is interesting to me that Ben Shapiro tries to paint this in a very similar light, because the announcement that Jonathan Majors was going to be in it, Ben Shapiro called what happened to Majors a cancellation. Ben, The man was convicted. Ben doesn't deny that he was convicted, but he tries to call it, I think his words were, a shallow conviction.
A pretty empty conviction.
What is that, Ben? What is that exactly? Do you not think assault in the third degree is actually a crime, or it shouldn't be? Is that what you're saying? I don't know what he's saying. I don't think he does either. Because the thing is, while Gina Carano was arguably originally fired from Disney because of her political beliefs, the specifics are a little bit more complicated. I talked about this years ago, short version. She was actually fired because she kept making bad headlines. Yes, with her political views, but she wasn't being asked to change her political views. She was asked to stop saying things that were causing big headlines that pretty much always started with the words Star Wars star Gina Carano causes controversy. And when she wouldn't stop doing that, they dropped her. Were her views somewhat political by their nature? Yes, if you feel that objecting to health orders and mask mandates and comparing that to Jews in Nazi Germany is an actual political point that you think is worth defending in any way, sure. Okay, she was canceled for political reasons. But Majors was convicted of a crime. It's not the same thing, Ben, and I think you kind of know that. It also brings up the question, does Majors actually want to work with these people? I actually can't find a lot about Majors' own politics. It's something that he's largely kept quiet on, and I expect will likely continue to do so, whereas Carano was outspoken in her politics, aligned with the Daily Wire. So at least philosophically, that was a marriage that made sense. With Majors, it smells far, far more of desperation than even Carano's move. And honestly, that partnership with Carano might be something Ben shouldn't be bringing that much attention to because it didn't go especially well or yield much success. We'll never know for certain what kind of viewer numbers Terror on the Prairie actually managed to get on Daily Wire Plus, but afterwards, Carano seemed way more interested in trying to force Disney to rehire her than she was in making anything else with the Daily Wire. And given that at least some of the Daily Wire audience were turned off by a female lead in an action movie, given the kinds of things that they don't like, I can't imagine they're going to be that much more embracing of a black man. Because the far-right audience that the Daily Wire panders to doesn't just want actors and producers and directors who agree with them, they want to see their values actually reflected on screen. And those quote-unquote values aren't really compatible with an action lead who's a woman or literally any lead character who's not white. I suspect Run, Hide, Fight kinda got away with it because despite having a female lead in an action movie, it is also a gun fetishist dream that basically says use of the Second Amendment is the best way to deal with school shooters. So it validated other deeply held positions by these folks. And although it isn't quite the same thing as Carano, this is the sort of thing that the Daily Wire is really desperately trying to sustain its dying entertainment brand on. Honestly, I'm kind of surprised they're trying to make a movie at all. They have recently gotten rid of their CEO, Jeremy Boring, who was the main face of all their entertainment stuff, which resulted in, amongst other things, a failed children's streaming service, a failed book publishing line, a failed adult animated series, the recently released, not particularly good-looking, but likely very expensive Pendragon cycle, Rise of the Merlin, all of which pretty costly flops, and they had, along the way, scooped up as many conservatives who were willing to work with them as possible who had once been names. Adam Carolla was the creator of Mr. Bertram, which Roseanne Barr, amongst others, appeared on. Rob Schneider voiced the dad on Benke's big premiere children's cartoon Chip Chilla. The Daily Wire craves legitimacy, and they will snatch up anybody who is or has been an actual name before who they can get to work with them. But the thing is, most people won't work with them unless they can't otherwise get work. That should kind of tell you something. Ben will always try and paint it as, oh, they were canceled for their political beliefs. But again, most of these people aren't being worked with by Hollywood because they're assholes. So when this new film was announced, it was announced as an action movie, which is admittedly a solid fit for Majors. He's good in action. He has a great physical presence. He's very good for that. Very few details have been released, although it is being reported that the working title for this film is Run, Hide, Fight, Infidel. So it looks like they're going to try and turn Run, Hide, Fight into an anthology branded series, kind of like what happened to Jarhead. You can check out Folding Ideas' video on Jarhead sequels if you want to know what happened there. But, difference is people actually saw and remembered Jarhead. Run, Hide, Fight, not so much. But its creators are comparing it to things like Red Dawn and claiming it harkens back to 80s and 90s style action movies, i.e. ones with either no political conscience or a distinctly conservative political conscience. So on April 3rd, Deadline posted an article detailing the situation and the conditions that led to multiple crew members walking off the set and for IATSE to call a strike against the production. IATSE is the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees. It's a union representing behind-the-scenes workers on theater, film, television, live TV, and a few other things. Now let's actually start with what appears to have been the last straw for most of the crew that has walked off, which is that Jonathan Majors and his co-star, J.C. Kilcoyne, they took a tumble through a window and fell 6 feet. We actually have footage of this. This was not supposed to happen. So here's what happened here. What was supposed to occur was that they were currently shooting the scene with the actors, and what was meant to happen is that later, a stunt crew would come in and perform a through-the-window stunt in that same location. So apparently, either because of flat-out incompetence, not knowing the correct way to do it, or just mixing up timetables on what should be happening when, the normal window had been taken out, and in its place was put the tempered glass window that would later be smashed through by the stunt team. That would be bad enough, but it was never secured. It was just sitting, freestanding in the window frame. So the instant any pressure was put on it, both Majors and Kilcoyne just went tumbling out along with the sheet of glass. There's no reports of injuries to Majors. However, it has been said that Kilcoyne had to have multiple stitches across his hands. Now, Kilcoyne's representatives were reached for comment, and they said, he's going to be fine, and he does not feel unsafe on that set, which feels like a very specific choice of words, and it's hard to put a ton of stock into that because, no offense to the guy, but J.C. Kilcoyne is an up-and-comer who does not have much to his resume and probably just doesn't want to rock the boat or upset the people he's working for, or at the very least, his management and agent don't want him to rock the boat and upset the people he's currently working for. Now, as I said, this entire thing appears to have been something of a last straw because there was plenty leading up to it. And honestly, it's that stuff that when I read it made my jaw drop. I'm like, wait, what? Because, yeah, the falling through the window, that's kind of showy, but the background of what had already been going on is bonkers. Apparently, safety had been a concern for a while. There have been multiple instances of props falling onto crew members. In specific, a tree branch that had been rigged to fall during a scene fell on top of all things, the on-set medic. Crew members have also said there have been a lack of meetings. There's no department heads meeting with the crew to tell them what the plan is. There aren't even meetings held by writer-director Kyle Rankin. There is no clear leadership or format to anything going on. And normally on a production like this, with action scenes that are complex to choreograph, plan, and set up for, as well as prop guns, you'd really expect meetings to be sure everybody's on the same page and behaving safe. Heck, there are reports that there isn't even a crew list. There is a quote-unquote black market crew list that the crew themselves circulated that they had to build themselves so they could figure out who even worked in what department and what positions were actually being covered and handled. And then there's the mold. So, there was a filming location that apparently the producers had already been warned about by a contractor who took a look at it that there was likely asbestos on site and it should be tested. No indication that ever happened. It probably didn't, but it's moot anyways, because when the crew got there to start prepping the location, they found black mold. Now, this did, fortunately, lead to an entirely new location being found, but it never should have gotten to that point. The crew never should have been allowed anywhere near a place that likely had asbestos, only to discover black mold themselves. There were also concerns raised about the presence of special effects supervisor Chris Bailey. Bailey had pled guilty to illegal possession of explosives in 2021. Now, this is something that he describes as a paperwork infraction, which is not an indefensible position, but here's the situation as I understand it. He was working on a film in Georgia, and was handling explosives, as the special effects supervisor might do. The problem was, due to an earlier conviction, I don't know what for, I couldn't find it, but due to an earlier conviction, he was barred by law from handling explosives, but he was doing it anyway. Now, to be clear, he was not charged with mishandling explosives or being unsafe with them, just that he wasn't legally supposed to be handling them at all, but he was. Now, his presence on the film set might be the most defensible thing that has gone on with all this, assuming, of course, that he isn't handling explosives again. But as long as he's not doing that, that's probably the most defensible thing. Although, again, it is just one more thing on the pile and not super great. Apparently, by the time the crew went on strike, 60% of them had signed union cards affirming that they wanted a collective bargaining agreement through IATSE. Now, I'm going to note right here, IATSE doesn't just troll around looking for non-union productions to step in and get its face in it. No, they don't do anything like that. Rather, they act when they receive notice from crews of non-union works who are saying, we feel unsafe or underpaid, or we just do not feel like this is a good working situation, and they ask for IATSE to come in and do collective bargaining for them. So they came in because the crew already felt unsafe and was going, hey, somebody help, the producers aren't fixing this. And that's when IATSE came in. Now, it does appear like they are trying to continue making the film. Who knows how much had already been filmed when the entire falling through the glass thing happened. But Dallas Sonnier has said a couple things, which I alluded to earlier. So when there was initially the report of the strikes happening, he put out a statement that included this little bit saying that he really wasn't worried about that because he and the other producers were, quote, too busy being badasses, blowing shit up, flying helicopters, and killing movie terrorists to concern ourselves with 4 assholes with signs on the sidewalk and their illegitimate strike. Yeah, sure, dude. Yeah, you're such a badass pretending to fight terrorists. Okay. And then there's this beauty, which is what he said in response to Deadline reaching out to him for comment on all this for the latest article. The industry's in free fall due to strikes, and now that their members are out of work, they're trying to sabotage the few people who are still producing. We don't negotiate with communists. First of all, yes, have there been strikes in the last few years? Absolutely. Is the industry shut down and everyone's out of work? No, that's just not the case. But we don't negotiate with communists. Oh my God. Okay, I could believe that he, and certainly the folks at the Daily Wire, they believe any degree of unionization is communism. But, I'll just point out, this movie is being made under a SAG-AFTRA contract. So, my God. Dallas, which is not even your real name, you gave yourself that as a nickname because that's where you wanted to make your movies, but you can't anymore because of everything that went down with Cinestate. No comment was an option. I think, if anything, it kind of shows the brain rot that happens to people who get tied up with the Daily Wire. Or maybe not brain rot, or at the very least, the lack of reason to do anything other than just double down forever. Because once you're associated with the Daily Wire, especially if you're continuing to work with them, what point is there at mitigating literally any position you might have? What is the point in being diplomatic? Nobody other than the ultra-conservatives want to work with you anymore anyways. So you might as well pander as hard as possible to MAGA. And boy, if they thought they were ever going to build anything that would in any way rival Disney, which, yes, they did actually claim was what they were trying to do early into the launch of all this entertainment-related stuff, you do need people to be able to work on your set who know what they're doing. Most of them are union members, or at least know what a union production looks like versus your bullshit. So I will be very curious if the Daily Wire even tries producing another. Like, again, I'm kind of surprised they tried to do this one. I would have thought that all the failed stuff from Jeremy Boring and getting rid of him as CEO would be their chance to just walk away from this. Stick to, at most, the quote-unquote documentaries of a scumbag like Matt Walsh, because those actually turn a profit because, well, they're incredibly cheap to make. You don't have to get a filming location and a crew and people who know special effects and at least one knowable Hollywood star with a name. You don't have to get any of that. You just have him go out there, do a bunch of nonsense, and cut it together in a way that appeals to your base, and you make a profit. That's a viable way to go forward. But again, I think they have a hard time letting go of their ambitions. Or honestly, it might even be Sonnier pushing them to try at least one more time because, as I said, I don't know if he thinks anyone else is going to finance him after this, or at least he doesn't know who it would be. And so if the Daily Wire stops making movies like this, what is he going to do? I don't know. And I suspect this might be half of the lingering ambitions of folks like Ben and half the desperate floundering of Sonnier. Because if Sonier's trying to make this new one on even less money than usual, which I'd expect he'd have to get the Daily Wire to finance him again, that sure would explain why this is such a mess. Because remember, the big scandal about his movies prior to this was one of his producers being a predator. I can't find too much in the way of unsafe conditions or missing key personnel that would lead to unsafe conditions. This seems to be a new problem, and being desperate and spending even less money than usual would account for it. And if Sonnier wants to keep this relationship with the Daily Wire going, it's in his best interest to give that blustery nonsense answer that he gave about being a badass in a helicopter and not negotiating with communists, as opposed to just saying, these people are giving me almost no money, I'm doing the best I can. That's assuming that he cares. He might flat out not care either. Actually, given what we're hearing about the conditions, I virtually guarantee that he doesn't care, or at least he doesn't care more than he wants to come in under budget. And that's, of course, on top of the additional floundering of Jonathan Majors, who, boy, I don't know what he thinks is going to happen to his career after this. And look, I'm not going to go so far as to say I feel sorry for the guy, but I am going to say that depending on what his financial situation is, I may at least understand why he did this. Because honestly, the best thing that most celebrities could do after something like what occurred with him would be to keep their head down and go quiet for a few years and try coming back in supporting roles and rebuilding a career from there. The thing is, not everybody can afford to do that. Not everybody can afford to pull a Robert Downey Jr., as well as that track to redemption ultimately worked. If the man had bills and needed to be working, yeah, I get why he'd take the people offering him work, even if that work means it's going to be even harder for him to find stuff that isn't also this. But who knows? I'm never going to see this thing. And I don't just mean I refuse to on principle. I mean, it's not going to show up in theaters. It's not going to be released meaningfully anywhere other than Daily Wire Plus, and I sure as hell ain't paying for that. The reason I highlighted Dallas Sonnier's quotes is because it paints a very specific picture. Because the overall image that I have based off what had been going on was not necessarily of malice, but of limited resources, limited experience, and producers more interested in cranking something out quickly and cheaply than doing it safely. That's not an uncommon story, and you can find it all kinds of places, especially in independent film. I wish that I could say that all independent films are just a way to tell amazing stories outside of the Hollywood system, and that does happen, but it can just as often happen that there are people running these sets who don't know what the hell they're doing, or even if they do, don't have the resources to run it properly and are running unsafe, ill-prepared, badly organized sets. There's a reason that whole thing with Rust and somebody actually getting killed on set by a gun fired by Alec Baldwin happened on an independent film and not a Hollywood one. Whatever you might think about Hollywood and whatever you might think about unions, they're usually pretty good about having procedures in place to ensure that that nonsense doesn't happen. Look, this is ultimately pretty simple for me. I'd already laughed my ass off on social media over the fact that Jonathan Majors agreed to be in a Daily Wire movie. And finding out that that movie is this much of an absolute shit show, that's just icing on the cake for me. That is beautiful. Because is there spite behind this desire? Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, these people all are monsters. I will remind you that Daily Wire is the home to Michael Knowles, who is the source of this clip.
Transgenderism must be eradicated from public life entirely.
And no, I will never stop showing that. So, is it personal? Yeah, it's damn personal for me, but it feels good somehow. And like Schadenfreude, sure, but it feels good knowing that not only are these people with terrible political views making movies that appeal to awful base instincts that I certainly have no interest in seeing movies that appeal to them, but they're also just bad at it. And they make horrible Bluey knockoffs and terrible comedies based off what was supposed to be a documentary, except they couldn't get any actual male athletes to agree to present themselves as trans. And so basically disproving their entire premise and then saying it's fiction and going forward anyways.
The base premise of the film isn't true. So much so that Ben Shapiro himself has accidentally said so.
Now, to be fair, I think I'd actually suggested to the Crane Boys that they do this as a doc.
Yes.
I originally went to them and I said, you guys should go try out for a bunch of ladies' leagues. And that became not possible because, as it turns out, most ladies' leagues don't allow in actual men.
All this would be BS even if these were perfectly safely run sets with well-organized production, run by people who knew what they were doing. The end results would still be terrible. But there's something real nice about knowing none of those things are true. You know what? Ben, Dallas, keep trying to be Hollywood. Please, don't ever stop. Don't ever give up these ambitions, because this was a laugh I needed, and I hope you can give me more of this. I'll never watch your movies, but I'll read the hell out of the nightmares of what's going on behind the scenes. This one was a quick turnaround because I just had to jump on this. I just had to get on this immediately. It was too good. What are your thoughts on any of this? Whatever they are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Patreon pays the bills, enables me to do this as my living. Even if you can't help me out that way, like, share, subscribe, all help. Don't worry too much about it, though. What I really want you to remember is that you are beautiful, you are valid, and you are loved. You are the council. I'm just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned. Why? Finger guns. Why? And now to thank my highest supporting patrons: Robin Moore, Jared Boyce, Zubin Lafula, Auntie Kate 808, Mira G, Angry Casperol, Dave Hall, Oliver B, Mystic Shadow, Sean Miller, Welsh Wrestling Geeks, Melissa Pedersen, Becky Sparks, Ulrich, Twilord, Tracy Scrabbit, Pau Barabajoggle, Sir Didymus is my favorite, and to thank some folks from the lower tiers: Cyborg Ex Machina, Alex, and Lightning Spirit. I've been saying Angry Casperol for ages, and I almost said Angie Casperol. You are distracting, the whole lot of you.